Tyrion Lannister stood in the war tent outside King's Landing, flanked by a small entourage of trusted soldiers. Across the table sat Kevan Lannister and Grand Maester Pycelle, both visibly skeptical. But Tyrion's offer was simple, and for once, devoid of sarcasm or cunning traps. He proposed an end to the war, Stark prisoners freed, the North granted autonomy under Robb Stark as king in the North, and a political marriage between House Lannister and House Stark to bind the peace. Cersei had refused to attend the meeting, still raging over the capture of Jaime and the humiliation at River Run. But Tywin Lannister had listened to Tyrion's plan the night before. He didn't speak much, just nodded slowly, his calculating mind spinning. Tyrion knew his father saw logic in the offer, even if his pride bristled. When the Raven flew north, Robb Stark was suspicious. He had known Lannister trickery since the execution of his father. But his bannermen were exhausted. Winter was hardening its grip, and the northern lords knew their supply lines were stretched thin. The war could drag on for years, with no guaranteed victory. Tyrion's message was signed by Tywin himself, bearing the red seal of House Lannister, and so, under heavy guard, Robb Stark, Catelyn, and a small retinue came to the twins. Neutral ground now, since Walder Frey had been mollified with fresh titles and gold. Tyrion came personally to meet Robb, bringing along Sansa Stark, whose reunion with her mother and brother was enough to break the tension for a moment. Sansa's tearful smile, Robb's protective grip, Catelyn's softened eyes. Tyrion knew he had struck the right chord. "We end the war now," Tyrion said, "or it will destroy all of us. The North is not ours to rule, and the South will never kneel to a wolf. But perhaps we can shake hands." Robb eyed him for a long time. "And what of the Iron Throne?" Tyrion gave the faintest of smirks. "Let my sweet nephew Joffrey sit on it. We'll keep him surrounded by adults. It's not ideal, but neither is this world. Peace, Robb, not victory." The pact was struck. Robb would wed Myrcella Baratheon, bringing Lannister blood into the North and ensuring the Starks a place in King's Landing. Sansa would remain a ward in the capital until the marriage was complete. Tyrion, unexpectedly, volunteered to serve as an envoy in Winterfell to oversee the transition. When the news reached the Riverlands, the Blackfish bristled, and the Great John roared in fury. But Catelyn stood behind her son, and Robb's word was law. Peace began to unfold, not easily, not perfectly, but enough to halt the carnage. King's Landing prepared for a symbolic wedding between Robb and Myrcella, now of age, while Tyrion worked to ensure Joffrey's madness remained contained. With Tywin's support, Cersei was sent to Casterly Rock under the pretense of illness, but in truth, a forced exile. The North returned to Winterfell. The Freys, appeased by new trade agreements and lands, held their tongues. Arya remained missing. Presumed dead, but Bran and Rickon, alive and secure, gave the North hope. Peace, however, is fragile in Westeros, and not everyone wanted it. Far in the east, Daenerys Targaryen heard whispers of a Lannister-Stark alliance and began to question whether her dream of retaking the throne was slipping further away. Winterfell had not changed much in stone and timber, but the people had. When Robb Stark returned, not as a conquering king, but as a ruler willing to make peace, he was met with a mix of cheers and wary silence. Some bannermen whispered that he had bent the knee in all but name. Others, especially those who had lost brothers and sons, welcomed any end to bloodshed. Tyrion arrived weeks later, escorted by Lannister guards but dressed plainly, wearing a fur-lined cloak to appease the northern cold and temperament. The direwolves growled when they smelled him, but Robb called them off. Bran, confined to a chair now, asked too many questions. Rickon barely spoke, but it was Maester Luwin who treated Tyrion with a professional politeness that helped break the ice. Tyrion's mission was more than diplomatic. He was to oversee, The integration of Lannister gold into northern rebuilding ensure Myrcella's safe passage and, more quietly, watch the north for signs of rebellion. Tywin trusted no one, not even peace itself. Myrcella's journey was long and careful. Robb waited at Moat Cailin for her, standing in the shadow of broken towers. When he saw her, golden-haired, delicate but composed, he forced a smile. She curtsied, and he bowed. Their union would be symbolic, not romantic, and both knew it. She had grown under the care of the Martells, who had taught her more about strength and poison than any Lannister court ever could. She was not her mother. The wedding at Winterfell was a subdued affair, no feasting, no grand display, just solemn vows, signed parchments, and cold wind. Tyrion gave the toast, lacing it with dry wit about how even the wolves and lions can share a den when it's snowing hard enough. Robb didn't laugh, but Myrcella smiled faintly. Back in King's Landing, Sansa Stark had found an unexpected ally in Margaery Tyrell, whose arrival to the court had tilted the game again. With Renly Baratheon dead and Margaery now engaged to Joffrey, the queen-to-be wielded influence with charm and grace. She kept Sansa close, and in private warned her of Joffrey's volatility. Joffrey's reign was held in check by Tywin's cold authority and Tyrion's behind-the-scenes manipulation. With Cersei gone, the court breathed easier. But the boy, King, simmered with resentment. He loathed the peace, loathed the idea of Robb being called king in the north, and especially loathed that his sister had been sent away to marry a traitor. In the east, Daenerys Targaryen sat in Meereen dragons, growing larger, stronger. Her advisors urged her to take ships west, but she paused. Westeros had found an unnatural calm. Her claim, though pure, seemed distant from the hearts of those rebuilding. A Lannister-Stark alliance made her path murkier. North of the Wall, however, a darker force stirred. The White Walkers, forgotten by most of Westeros, had not forgotten the realm of men. And as Jon Snow, still a loyal brother of the Night's Watch, stared into the frost-bitten horizon, he wondered if peace in the south would matter when death marched from the north. Back in Winterfell, Tyrion wrote a raven to his father. "The north tolerates us, barely, but it may be enough. Still, I fear Robb Stark more as a friend than I ever did as an enemy. He smiles like Ned, but his eyes are sharper." Tywin didn't reply, but Tyrion knew the silence meant, keep watching, keep the peace, but stay ready for war. Snow fell hard across the north that winter, burying past blood beneath fresh white silence. Yet peace never truly settled. In the shadows of Winterfell, old grudges whispered. Some northern lords still cursed the idea of a Lannister queen, even one as composed and kind as Myrcella. Her soft steps and courteous words could not undo the red wedding that almost was, or the deaths at River Run and Torrens Square. Robb did what he could. He held councils, invited bannermen to speak freely, and made a show of honoring old traditions. He hunted with the Umbers, dined with the Karstarks, and sent ravens to rebuild broken houses. Yet he felt the tension in every hall, between loyalty and pride, forgiveness, and vengeance. Tyrion, meanwhile, made himself useful. He proposed using Lannister gold to rebuild trade routes from White Harbor to the Neck. He helped smooth tensions between Glover and Manderley over a disputed border. He hosted a feast to commemorate the rebuilding of the Great Hall and drank far too much northern mead while doing it. But for all his efforts, he remained a Lannister in the Wolf's Den. One night, in Robb's Solar, Tyrion said plainly, "The North is yours in all but name. But one wrong move, and it will slip through your fingers. Your people are watching, waiting to see if peace weakens you." Robb looked up from a map of the wall. "They watch to see if a wolf sleeps beside a lion or beneath one." "And what do you think?" Tyrion asked. "I think lions don't like the cold. Robb replied without smiling. In King's Landing, Joffrey's hatred grew darker. He took pleasure in punishing minor lords, in flaying a stable boy for losing a hound. He demanded Myrcella's return, threatening war. But Tywin silenced him with a single command, and had Pycelle increase the milk of the poppy in his evening wine. Slowly, the boy king grew calmer in public, but his fits in private were wilder than ever. Margaery Tyrell, ever graceful, began whispering to her grandmother Olenna. They could not let Joffrey remain on the throne for long. Tommen was malleable, kind. He would do well. Sansa, sitting quietly beside them, began to understand the real game of thrones, not fought with swords, but with secrets, poison, and patience. Meanwhile, word came from the Wall. Wildlings had gathered in massive numbers beyond the frost-fanged ridges, and the Night's Watch had lost contact with several northern outposts. Jon Snow, promoted now to First Ranger, sent a desperate raven to Robb. The real war is coming, and it's not between lions and wolves. Robb read it in silence. Then he looked at Tyrion. Do your people believe in White Walkers? Tyrion raised an eyebrow. We believe in gold, wine, and power. Ice demons, less so, but I've read the old tales. They're not tales, Robb said, eyes cold as the snows outside. And if we don't stop them, it won't matter who sits, the Iron Throne. In Meereen, Daenerys grew restless. The fragile peace in Westeros had held longer than her advisors predicted. She had ships now, more unsullied, and 3 dragons who no longer fit in cages. She considered sailing west, but something held her back. She wanted to arrive as a liberator, not a conqueror. Yet Westeros didn't need saving anymore, at least not from itself. But in the quiet places, conspiracies stirred. Pater Baelish had vanished from the Eyrie and was last seen in Braavos. Varys whispered less and listened more. And somewhere, in the Riverlands, the Brotherhood without banners found a red priestess with fire in her eyes and visions of a king reborn in the flames. The peace was holding, but the winds were shifting, and winter had truly come. The raven came at dawn. It bore the black wax of the Night's Watch, cracked from the cold, its parchment stiff with frost. Robb read it once, twice. Then he called a war council. Castle Black is under siege, he said to the assembled lords of the north. The wildlings are attacking in numbers we've never seen. Jon Snow says Mance Rayder leads thousands. Worse, he says the dead walk again. The lords muttered, scoffed, exchanged uneasy glances. Lord Manderley, fat and shrewd, asked first, "Why should we concern ourselves with black-cloaked bastards and dead men's tales?" Robb's voice cut through the hall. "Because if the wall falls, the north falls next, and we'll be too scattered and divided to stop what comes after." Tyrion was quiet, listening from the corner near the hearth. He didn't speak until all had argued themselves hoarse. If Jon Snow exaggerates, we'll waste men. But if he tells the truth and we do nothing, we all die. He drained his cup. I prefer a warm death in bed, but I'll settle for freezing. Heroically if it means not becoming a white. They agreed reluctantly. Robb would march north with a host, not the full strength of the north, but enough to reinforce Castle Black. Myrcella would remain in Winterfell with a Lannister guard and Catelyn Stark for protection. Tyrion insisted on joining the march. If your brother dies, my wine bill triples. South of the Neck, Tywin Lannister received word of Robb's movement. His brow furrowed, not out of fear, but calculation. War in the north might weaken the Starks or strengthen them. He ordered no interference, for now. In King's Landing, Joffrey grew restless again. He struck Margaery during an argument, and the Tyrells began preparations in secret. Varys reached, out to Tyrion in code, sending a cryptic raven that read, "The garden grows impatient. The thorns sharpen." Sansa watched it all unfold with quiet precision. Her lessons with Margaery and Olenna had turned her into more than a survivor. She learned to smile at threats, flatter the foolish, and remain invisible until it mattered. When Joffrey screamed that she should be flogged for smiling during court, she apologized sweetly and marked the faces of those who laughed. Back at the wall, Jon Snow stood atop the battlements of Castle Black as the fires burned beyond the Apurii. Trees, wildlings howled at the gates, giants pounded the earth, and in the far, frozen distance, he saw something that made his blood chill. White shapes in the dark, silent and slow, moving without heat or breath. Robb arrived 5 days later, bringing with him 3,000 northern men. They passed through the last hearth and saw villages burned, livestock frozen in place, and snow-covered corpses that didn't rot. When the brothers embraced on the wall, it was not as bastard and king, but as men standing before the abyss. "It's worse than you imagine," Jon said. "They're not just wildlings. The walkers are leading them." Robb turned to Tyrion. "You've read the old stories. Tell me what kills them." Tyrion grimaced. "Dragonglass, fire, Valyrian, steel. Unfortunately, I brought none of the above, just sarcasm and a mild liver problem. But Jon had dragonglass, crates of it, discovered in a hidden cave on Dragonstone, and sent north months ago by Stannis Baratheon before his disappearance. The irony wasn't lost on them." That night, Tyrion wrote to Daenerys. He didn't know if she would receive it or care, but he ended the letter with one line: "The realm you seek to rule may not exist by the time you arrive." Daenerys read it days later in Meereen. She folded it silently. Her dragons stirred restlessly above the pyramids. She looked to the west and whispered, "It's time." The wind howled like a dying beast as the battle at the wall began. Robb Stark stood beside Jon Snow atop the frozen ramparts, watching the tide of wildlings break against the black stone. Mammoths dragged siege towers. Giants hurled boulders. And behind them, too far to touch, but too close to ignore, stood figures draped in ice and shadow, the White Walkers. Robb had fought men, fought knights, archers, even traitors, but he had never fought death itself. Jon commanded the knights. Watch like a man born to lead. He moved with quiet certainty, giving orders in the chaos. Robb followed his cues, putting northern soldiers alongside the Black Brothers where the lines thinned. Tyrion, staying in the rear, offered strategy and shouted suggestions, but for once, he did not seek a place on the field. "Too cold to die with style," he muttered, half frozen behind a map table. The battle stretched into days. Fires roared atop the wall. Arrows rained. Dragon-glass blades shattered against bone and ice. They held the gate, barely. On the third night, the walkers advanced. They did not run. They glided. Robb stood in the center yard when one of them came through the broken outer gate. Its sword sang like winter wind, cutting through steel. It moved toward Robb, unblinking, soundless. Jon hurled him a dragonglass dagger. Robb caught it mid-air and plunged it into the creature's chest as it lunged. The walker shrieked and exploded into frost and shards of light. But more came, and beyond them, something darker stirred in the woods, a shape larger than any man, its eyes like blue stars, watching. Far to the south, Daenerys sailed west. Her fleet had left Meereen under cover of fog. Drogon circled high above, while Rhaegal and Viserion soared alongside, casting massive shadows over the water. The dragons had grown monstrous, no longer children of fire, but gods of it. Tyrion's letter had shaken her. Westeros had always been her dream, but she had waited too long, and the dream had changed. Now it was no longer a throne she sought. It was to preserve what remained. With her came the Unsullied, led by Grey Worm, and a new host of allies, exiled. Knights, freedmen, and even a few red priests who whispered of ice and fire in the same breath. In King's Landing, Tywin received word of the siege at the Wall and of Daenerys's fleet moving toward Westeros. He kept the news from Joffrey, but not from the Tyrells. Olenna Tyrell arrived in his chambers uninvited. "Your plans are unraveling, Lord Tywin," she said, offering no pleasantries. "Your lioness daughter is exiled. Your boy king grows madder by the day, and now comes the Dragon Queen with fire to match the North's ice." Tywin didn't flinch. "We will do what we must." "So will I," she replied, and left him alone in the firelight. That very night, Joffrey Baratheon choked on a goblet of Arbor Red during a feast in the Red Keep. Sansa, present but silent, did not move to help him. The court wept. Margaery fainted beautifully. Tommen ascended the throne within a week, too young to understand the crown's weight, but far more willing to listen to counsel. Varys sent a single raven to Tyrion at Castle Black. "The monster is dead. The game shifts. Return when you can. We will need a hand." But Tyrion could not leave. Not yet. The Wall held, for now. But the woods whispered of worse things. The dead rose faster. The air froze deeper. And some among the Night's Watch began to mutter that this was not a battle. It was a beginning. The smoke from the fires at Castle Black could be seen for miles. Jon Snow stood by the Wall's great lift, armor cracked, blood frozen to his tunic. Robb Stark limped beside him, half his cloak missing, a makeshift bandage wrapped around his ribs. The battle had not broken them, but it had changed them. They had held the gate, repelled the wildlings, even turned back the first wave of White Walkers. But victory felt hollow. Hundreds lay dead. The dead who rose again had to be burned before nightfall each day. And the Wall itself had begun to groan, the ancient spells in its stone weakening. Tyrion's hands trembled from cold and exhaustion. He kept a ledger of the dead, of the supplies, of every arrow fired and every barrel of pitch spent. "We can't do this again," he said one night to Jon. "Another wave like that, and we'll be defending ourselves with sarcasm and spoon handles." But hope arrived from the skies. 3 days after the siege, as the battered defenders stood atop the Wall, the dragons came. The roar split the sky, a sound no one had heard in 100 years. Drogon led, black wings slicing through the snow-clouded heavens. Rhaegal and Viserion followed. The heat of their breath melted the frost on the battlements. Jon staggered back. Robb's sword dropped from his hand. Tyrion, eyes wide, whispered, "She came." Daenerys Targaryen landed at Castle Black on Dragonback, her silver hair whipping in the wind. She wore dark armor, her face hard as carved obsidian. She dismounted without a word and approached Jon and Robb. "Is this what's left of the North?" she asked. Jon bowed slightly. Robb did not. "You're late," he said. Dany's eyes narrowed, but she didn't argue. Instead, she turned to her dragons. "Let's finish this." Over the next weeks, the tide turned. With Dragonfire, the dead burned before they could rise. With unsullied ranks reinforcing the battered men of the Watch, the Wall's defense was hardened. Jon rode with Rhaegal once, tentatively, and saw from the sky what he never imagined, miles of nothingness, broken only by movement. Armies of corpses walking southward, endless and patient. In the south, Tywin received word of Joffrey's death with a clenched jaw and a quiet nod. The cause remained unclear, but the effect was immediate. Tommen Baratheon, sweet and pliable, now sat the Iron Throne. Cersei remained at Casterly Rock under strict watch, and the Tyrells now held more sway than ever. Tywin began to draft new alliances. He sent ravens to Dorne, to the Vale, even to the Iron Islands. Westeros had grown still, but he could feel the ground shifting. If Daenerys brought fire and the North brought ice, then House Lannister would need to bring something else. control. In Winterfell, Myrcella ruled quietly with Lady Catelyn's guidance. Her presence, once seen as an affront, now became a point of pride. "A lioness in the snow," the small folk whispered. She wrote daily to Robb, asking for news, sending supplies. Her letters were not of love, but of unity. A new kind of alliance. Tyrion wrote to her once. "You are the only thing keeping peace wrapped around this war like a fraying cloak. Don't let go." In the Riverlands, chaos brewed. The Brotherhood without banners began attacking Lannister supply lines again. The Hound, alive and wandering, was spotted near Harrenhal. Beric Dondarrion had vanished, and Melisandre, the Red Woman, was said to be traveling north, seeking Jon Snow, speaking of Azor Ahai reborn. Tyrion listened as Jon and Daenerys debated nightly about strategy, about fire, about prophecy. Robb often stayed silent. When asked what he believed, he finally answered, "I believe in my sword. I believe in the men who followed me into death and back. And I believe if we don't stop this darkness at the wall, no throne matters." Daenerys looked at him. "You were once my enemy." "I was," Robb said. "Now we bleed on the same snow." And so the dragons prepared to fly again, not to conquer, but to burn a path through the dead. Jon would ride with them. Robb would lead on the ground. Tyrion would go south to prepare King's Landing for the truth. And the truth was, this, the real war had begun. Tyrion Lannister rode south under heavy guard, the wind colder than memory. Snow fell even beyond the neck now, creeping toward the fertile lands of the Reach. The seasons no longer obeyed the gods or the sun. Winter was not coming. It had come. As he approached King's Landing, ravens outpaced him. Messages from the wall, letters written by Robb, Jon, and Daenerys, all bore the same warning. The dead are real, and they are marching. Tyrion expected resistance, disbelief, even mockery. But instead, he arrived to find the capital changed. Joffrey's death had softened its cruel edges. Tommen, though young, ruled gently under the firm and clever hand of Margaery Tyrell. The Tyrells had poured food into the city, reopened the granaries, soothed the small folk. The Lannister guards patrolled quietly now, not with arrogance, but discipline. Tywin summoned Tyrion to the Tower of the Hand immediately. No smiles, no embrace. "What proof do you bring?" Tywin asked. 3 dead men rose and tried to kill me in my tent, Tyrion replied. "Does that suffice?" Tywin didn't blink. "Then the war is not against rebels. It's against death itself." Tyrion poured himself wine. "You say that like it's a political inconvenience." "It is," Tywin said, "but we will adapt." In the small council chamber, Tyrion laid out a plan. Grain stores moved northward, smiths to begin reforging blades from Valyrian steel and dragon glass with whatever could be found, and a unified army under multiple banners to march in the spring. Cersei's absence still hung over the court. No one knew exactly what she did at Casterly Rock, but rumors said she had taken to burning effigies of Daenerys and cursing Tyrion's name with wine-soaked breath. Tommen accepted the need for alliance. Margaery, wise beyond her years, proposed an unprecedented act. The Southern Lords would swear temporary allegiance not to a single king, but to a council formed by the heads of the great houses. "Until the threat is ended," she said, "let us not wear crowns, but armor." Meanwhile, in the north, Daenerys and Jon flew together for the first time. Rhaegal and Drogon soared above the haunted forest, raining fire down upon advancing columns of whites. Below them, Robb led cavalry charges through frozen valleys, dragon glass spears shattering ice-coated corpses, but they were not winning. Every victory was followed by more of them. The Night King had not yet shown himself, but his presence loomed like a shadow over the world. The walkers had changed their tactics, slipping through the darkness, striking in silence, avoiding the dragons. At night, Jon and Daenerys sat in the war tent, maps before them, and flame dancing in their eyes. They disagreed constantly. She favored fire and fury. He urged patience and structure, and Robb, quiet but relentless, kept them grounded. We fight. We survive. That's all there is now, he told them. Whatever comes after, it's for another day. Arya Stark returned from the shadows. She arrived at Castle Black without a word, wearing the face of a northern scout and carrying the dagger of Valyrian steel Bran had once given her. She said nothing at first, just listened, watched, trained. But when Jon saw her, he embraced her like a ghost returned. They don't fear pain, she said. They don't sleep, but they die. How do you know? He asked. I killed one. And then came the Red Woman. Melisandre rode through the shattered gate at Eastwatch by the sea, her red robes flaring in the wind. The Lord of Light demands fire, she said. Azor Ahai is here. She looked at Jon Snow. Then she looked at Daenerys and then at Arya. The prince who was promised is not one, she said. It is three, born of smoke and salt, bound by blood and blade. Jon dismissed her. Daenerys tolerated her, but Arya listened. Far beyond the wall, the night, King stood alone atop a frozen hill. He raised one hand. Snow began to fall, not from clouds, but from clear skies, and deep beneath the earth, something stirred, something older than men, older than dragons, and it had finally awakened. The final march began beneath a blood-red sky. From Winterfell rode the last true army Westeros would ever know. Starks, unsullied, Night's Watch, free folk, Lannister knights who had sworn to fight beside their ancient enemies, and the shattered remains of dozens of houses, great and small. Above them flew dragons, their shadows sweeping the snow-blind fields like omens of fire. Jon Snow led the vanguard. Robb Stark commanded the shield wall. Arya vanished before dawn, slipping into the frozen north with a blade of Valyrian steel. Tyrion Lannister remained behind, stationed in Winterfell's Godswood, writing final letters, preparing last words. Not a war for gold, he murmured. Just one last wager against death. The Night King had crossed the shattered wall. The army of the dead stretched horizon to horizon. Giants, children, mothers, kings, thousands upon thousands of eyeless corpses, all driven by a single will at the heart of their ranks, the night. King atop an undead Viserion, blue fire leaking from its torn jaw, wings of bone and ice crackling in the wind. The battle began in a silence deeper than snow. Drogon and Rhaegal met their fallen brother in the sky. Dragonfire clashed with Frostflame. Robb's cavalry charged, men shouting in desperation, knowing they charged death itself. Jon fought on foot, Longclaw cutting down wights by the dozen. Daenerys descended from the skies in a roar of fire, her command unleashing infernos across the field. It was not enough. They burned and killed and shattered, but the dead did not stop. For every white fallen, another rose. The Night King could not be touched by fire. Arrows broke on his armor. He glided through the chaos like a phantom, raising the fallen behind Daenerys' lines, splitting the armies in two. Then Arya struck, from the trees, through shadow, in silence. She leapt from behind a pile of the dead, Valyrian dagger glinting in her hand. The Night King turned and caught her by the throat. He smiled. She dropped the blade and caught it in her other hand. The dagger plunged into the Night King's chest, just as it had in Bran's vision. He exploded in a storm of ice and silence. For one instant, all sound vanished. Then the dead fell, all of them. Viserion collapsed mid-air. Whites shattered like brittle glass. Giants groaned and crumbled. The field became still. The living staggered, back from the edge of extinction. Later, they found Arya half buried in snow, her face pale, her fingers frozen around the hilt. Jon carried her to safety. When the fires were finally lit and the dead burned for the last time, they gathered at the weirwood in Winterfell. Daenerys stood beside Jon and Robb. She spoke without crown or claim. "This land lives because of all of you. Not for thrones, not for bloodlines, for each other." Tyrion read the terms of peace the next day. The Iron Throne would be melted down, reforged into swords for the realm's defense. No king would rule alone again. Instead, a council, chosen by all houses, great and small, would govern. Jon refused a seat. He returned to the wall with the remnants of the Night's Watch. "The realms of men need watching," he said. "Someone always has to." Daenerys flew east again with Drogon, carrying the memory of fire and the cost of power. Some say she landed in Valyria. Others say she vanished into myth. Robb returned to Winterfell with Myrcella, who ruled beside him not as queen, but as partner. The North remained free, not from duty, but from tyranny. Sansa came north too, changed forever but finally at peace. Bran sat quietly under the weirwood, whispering to crows. Tyrion lived longer than anyone expected. He became the first elected hand of the realm, served 3 kings, and died in his bed, wine in hand, laughter in the hall. Arya sailed west of Westeros, chasing what lay beyond maps. And in the quiet that followed the storm, the people remembered not the names of kings or battles, but the moment the living stood together and said, "Not today."